We'll start recording. Go. All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started promptly here at 6 p.m. on October 14th. Hello, everyone. I would like to welcome you to the public meeting and community conversation titled Horizon 2045, How Transportation Changes Impact You. And we have our SRTC Board of Directors Chair, Mayor Ben Wick, to say a few words to kick this meeting off. I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. Well, thank you and welcome everybody for joining either via Zoom or live streamed now as well. And so again, thank you for taking your time. So I'm going to give my elevator speech of the Spokane Regional Transportation Council. So this is the entity where we all come together as a region for transportation planning. And so it's made up of all the municipalities in the metro area. And so myself, I get the pleasure of serving as the board chair right now, but we have the commissioners from the Spokane County, we have the City of Spokane representatives, as well as all the small cities and towns as well. And so again, really appreciate that. We're looking for your feedback and hope you're very active tonight, and please participate so we can make a better plan for our region. And thanks again for taking the time. Go Gonzaga.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would like to introduce the speakers that you'll hear from tonight. We have our new Executive Director of SRTC, Lois Ballenbach, and then we'll also hear from Mike Ulrich, Ryan Stewart, Michael Redlinger, myself, and Amber Lenhart. So just a few meeting housekeeping items. We'll ask just to ensure good sound. If you're not using your microphone, please just keep it muted. The chat function is available for anyone to answer questions or comment throughout the meeting, and we'll sort of monitor that throughout. As you all saw, the meeting's being recorded for those who might miss it. We'll also be sharing it on our social media and website, and it will be available upon request as well. If you can figure out how to use the little hand raise icon, you're welcome to do that, or just unmute if it's the time for question and answer. We'll try and, since this is a fairly small group right now, I think we can manage it. And then as some of you may know, hopefully all of you may know now, incentives are part of this public meeting. And we will be collecting, we're hoping that you can stay the whole meeting. We'll be collecting your information. We have a SurveyMonkey link that we'll share with you, and then you'll be able to hop onto that and share your name, email, and how you would like to receive the information or the incentive. And so we'll be collecting that towards the end. A brief look at the agenda for tonight. We're going to share right after this our SRTC video. We'll hear from Lois. We'll break up the Horizon 2045 into a couple different sections, one being an overview, one being a priority and trade-offs section. We'll also talk about equity and engagement in Horizon 2045, and end tonight's meeting with a 30-minute open discussion. We have a couple questions for the audience and participants, so we hope that you are all able to stay for that. And as I mentioned, if you're new to SRTC or Horizon 2045, we hope this video provides you a bit of background. It's about 2 minutes, and I will just start with play here. Can I actually confirm that you could hear the music? No, okay. I need to stop sharing. Sorry about this. Share with sound. Okay, I'll get a head nod from Mike.
Think about the region we all call Spokane. The river, the mountains and their forests, the lakes, the rolling wheat fields of the Palouse, and the trails that connect our communities. You may have heard this all before. The Spokane region is a fabulous place to live, to work and to play. It's rich in natural beauty and culture, with thriving employment and economic centers and renowned medical and educational institutions. But what is the one thing that connects it all? Our transportation network. Literally. Let's be honest. Most of us move around the region without thinking about the complex transportation network that connects us to the places we want to go, whether we're going shopping or to school, to visit with family and friends, or to explore nature. Our transportation network connects us to other cities and regions by air. It connects us to our jobs by driving, transit, biking, and walking. It connects farmers to their markets by freight and rail. Our region is growing, not only outward, but inward and upward. To accommodate that growth, we must plan for all modes of transportation, whether that's expanding our public transportation services, fixing and constructing roadways, or connecting our trails and sidewalks. The Spokane Regional Transportation Council needs your help to understand this future. SRTC brings together local leaders and technical experts from Spokane County and its 13 cities and towns, with community members, stakeholders, and governments, to develop a plan to fund and prioritize transportation investments. Horizon 2045, it's your long-range transportation plan that looks ahead 20 years to address continued growth and prepare for economic changes. The plan outlines the region's shared vision for our transportation system, so our packages can get delivered on time, we can easily get to where we work and play, and our kids can get to school safely. Horizon 2045 will be adopted in December of this year, and we'd like to have your input included in the plan. Connect with us at srtc.org to learn more and share your thoughts.
All right. So that is just a short introduction, and I'm going to turn it over to our new Executive Director, Ms. Lewis.
Good afternoon, everyone. And for those of you that are joining us, thank you so much for taking your time this evening to learn a little bit about the long-range plan that we're trying to put together for this area. As Mayor Wick mentioned, what we do is we try to coordinate transportation planning throughout the region, the cities, the county, the Department of Transportation, public transit. Everyone is working to try and improve their systems. And we, as an organization at SRTC, try to make sure that all of these different groups and all of these different activities are talking to each other, sharing information, and heading forward in a way that's going to be positive for the area. So as we think about transportation and the SRTC, we get to plan big projects, interchanges and highways, and we get to plan small projects, sidewalks that people need to use to get from their home to a bus stop or kids to school. So we work on the needs of today, and we work on the needs that we expect to have in the future. We know that there's lots of growth and development going on. Transportation is changing and there's new technologies coming out. Technologies within vehicles and technologies that help the infrastructure work better. People are changing as well, and we've seen that dramatically as a result of COVID. More people are working remotely. People are changing how they vacation and how they get around. There's more package delivery than ever. So as we think about the future and we try to plan out into the year 2045, we really have to think not just about the issues that we face today, but we have to think big and bold about what might present itself into the future. Electric vehicles, autonomous vehicles, drone deliveries. It really, you got to be visionary. So 2045, again, tries to forecast population and employment and how we might get around in the future and estimate the demands that'll be on our transportation system. And staff is going to talk a little bit about the different ways that we do some of those activities. But what is really important tonight for all of you that are joining us is that in order for us to build the community that serves you, we really need to do our best in understanding what people need and want. And that means all people, people that are wheelchair users, people that are transit riders, all across the age spectrum. It is hard for us sometimes to know what the journey of somebody else looks like. And so when we hold these public meetings, we have an opportunity to better understand the different communities that we serve and the people that live in them. And so we hope that throughout this process, you'll share some of your experiences, some of your needs, some of your desires, and that'll really help understand whether we're on the right track. I think a lot of efforts throughout this planning opportunity have been made to engage the community and understand those needs. And today is an opportunity for you to let us know whether we, again, are on track. The challenge we face, and you'll hear about this later, is we can't afford everything that everybody wants. The money just isn't there, and the forecasts show that. So we have to make tough choices. If we can't build everything, it becomes even more important to make sure that what we do build is what we really need. So again, I appreciate your time, and I hope that you'll have some thoughts and opinions after you've heard from staff that you can share to make sure that we're implementing a plan that's going to work for you in your community. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Kylie and let her introduce the next staff member.
Great, thank you, Lois. And actually, since we introduced ourselves, I thought it would be neat if you'd like to introduce yourself and maybe the community that you represent or organization, or if you're just here as a citizen tonight, go ahead and throw that in the chat box, and we can just see who's with us. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mike to share more about the Horizon 2045, and I'm going to share my screen again. Go.
Thanks, Kylie and Lois and Ben. So I want to start our presentation here, and we've already used this term so far, but I want to make sure that we're doing our best to make sure that the terms that we're using tonight are understood by our group here. So I'm going to start with the transportation system. A transportation system is all of the elements that allow someone to move around their community and travel between communities. So there's sidewalks, there's trails, it's the transit network that STA operates and other transit providers. It's the roads, air that Spokane Airports provide service for. It's rail like Amtrak. All of the things that allow you to get from point A to point B are what we refer to as a transportation system. So you're going to hear that term thrown around probably a lot tonight, and hopefully that helps you understand what we mean when we say that. So local jurisdictions like the city of Deer Park, for example, or Spokane County, they're primarily focused on the local transportation system, things like neighborhood streets or local sidewalks, et cetera. The state, or the Washington Department of Transportation, they're primarily focused on the state system. These are freeways, state highways, things like that. As Lois mentioned, SRTC is responsible for developing a plan that coordinates all transportation providers and ensures that the regional network is operating safely and effectively. Next slide, please, Kylie. So before we go further, I want to orient you with the format of the plan that we're here to talk about tonight. And you can see on the right-hand side of your screen there, that's the cover of the document. So we're here, of course, tonight to talk about Horizon 2045. So the plan itself is broken into 4 chapters. Chapter 1 is who we are. This is the history of Spokane. It really serves as the foundation of the document. Chapter 2 is what we're calling where we're at. This is the current condition of the transportation network, where we've analyzed things like congestion and travel time and all of the things that matter as you try to get from point A to point B. And that's how chapter 2 is really about how it exists currently. Chapter 3 is where we're going. This is where we start to look into the future, as Lois mentioned, into the year 2045. That's what we call our horizon year. And chapter 4 is really about those plans and projects, or I should say those programs and projects that, if implemented, will help us get to that future. The other thing I should point out here is staff fully recognizes that a 123-page PDF filled with analysis and policies is not exactly the most engaging format. So we fully get that, and we certainly don't expect that anyone's read all 123 pages, although that would be nice if you've gone to that effort, you get a special kudos. But we are looking at options for building a web-based interactive platform that allows people an opportunity to explore the plan in a more engaging way. And so later in the presentation, we're going to be asking for your feedback on that. Next slide, please. Thanks, Kelly. So we've talked about the transportation system. We've talked about the plan itself, but before we get too far into the presentation, I do want to slow down and talk a little more detail about what a transportation plan actually is. Lois talked about some of these elements, but I want to sort of expound on those a little bit. First, it considers all methods of travel, or what we call multimodal, many modes. It contains the goals, objectives, policies, and projects, as Lois mentioned, that will shape our regional transportation system over the next 20 plus years. There's a variety of analysis in the plan, but fundamentally the plan compares where we are now with where we expect to be in the next 20 plus years. Part of where we think we'll be is really about where do we want to be. And so staff can analyze all the hard data sets, but a successful plan relies on input from the transportation user, from you guys. And that's where that public input, like what you're providing here tonight, comes into play. So I mentioned the plan identifies where we are now. This is where people live and work. And so excuse me, in the plan, try to identify the populations and the employment of where people are living, where they're working, because that relationship is very important. And we want to understand that relationship and its impacts on the transportation system. Not only where people work, but where they might go to school, where they worship. All of these trips that are added to the system are important to understand so we can understand those impacts. It also considers growth into the future. We have sort of some complex mathematical based ways to understand and to forecast that growth as we get closer to that horizon year. It analyzes the needs. That's what do we need to build to accommodate that growth, not just build, but programs like safety or technology driven programs. And it talks about the strategies to meet those needs. It's really a balance between how much we need as a region and how much we can afford. You heard Lois talk about that. So Ryan's going to talk in a little bit more detail about those trade-offs. But before I turn it over to him, I just want to pause and see if there's any questions related to what I've presented so far. If you have a question, as Kylie mentioned, feel free to use that raise hand function or take yourself off mute to speak, or you can type a question in the chat if there are any. Maybe give it just another 10 or 15 seconds, Kylie, and if we don't have any, we can keep rolling.
I want to say welcome to everybody who's put their information in the chat. Hello to all of you. Welcome. Thank you for being here. All right, not seeing any questions. We'll hand it over to Ryan. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike and Kylie. My name is Ryan Stewart. I'm a principal transportation planner with SRTC. I've been in planning for 20 plus years, so I've seen a lot of these long-range visions developed. And there's a process that you need to go through. How do you prioritize transportation needs over 20 plus years? Most of us can't even think about next week or next year. Well, it's a balancing act in essence, and we have to balance our needs just like we balance our household budget. We have needs, for example, groceries, but we have to balance that against limited resources. So we only have so much income coming in. Well, for this plan, we have estimated those resources. And as Lois mentioned earlier, we have limited funding available for transportation investments in our region. And that's just the reality. That's the world that we live in. For this planning horizon, it's about 23 years for Horizon 2045. We estimate about $14 billion in resources, and that sounds like a lot. And that includes about 2.7 billion over the next 6 years. But that's all of the funding available to the region that's coming in for paving roads and keeping our transit system running and ensuring our sidewalks are in good condition and putting in more bike lanes, things like that. So while that does sound like a very big number, again, we're faced with limited funding compared to the large need. So forecasting our revenues or the funding coming in does involve some uncertainty. Economic fluctuations, for example, stemming from what we're all too familiar with, COVID-19 pandemic, those are ongoing. And like I said, I've seen a lot of those over the last couple of decades. And, you know, we have incorporated those potential impacts of the ongoing pandemic. And Washington State and Spokane Transit also incorporate some of those impacts when they're trying to see in their crystal ball what funding may look like in the future. And other revenue sources, such as the tax that we pay when we fill up our gas tanks, and sales tax revenues. So when we buy goods and services, those may be very sensitive to changes in transportation usage and consumption patterns. So again, there are some uncertainty in the forecasts that we produce, but again, we're using the best available information that we have, and there is a recognition that there could be new revenue tools or sources that don't currently exist. But again, like I mentioned, it's essentially a balancing act. The needs analysis that was recently completed by our colleague David here at SRTC shows that there's a much greater need than the funding that we have available, almost 19 or more than $19 billion. So quite a shortfall in order to adequately operate and maintain our regional transportation system. Local jurisdictions, they're looking at maintenance and operation needs of more than $26 million per year. The state estimates more than 10 million in annual unfunded maintenance and operation needs, and just in our county here. The region's three largest jurisdictions, the city of Spokane and the city of Spokane Valley and Spokane County, they have fallen behind because they don't have enough funding. So they have a backlog of over $630 million. And the state estimates that they also have a backlog of 80 million. So you can see these are big numbers, but they start to add up to, again, billions of dollars in needs versus less that's expected to come into the region in funding. So again, our analysis shows about $19 billion in needs, but only $14 billion in funding that's anticipated for the same period. Next slide, please. So how do we balance our needs versus the resources? Well, there's been a change occurring, not only in our region, but everywhere. And it's a shift from an emphasis on building new roads and huge new regionally significant capital expenditures to a recognition that we need to fund operations, maintenance, and preservation. Essentially, we need to take care of what we already have. One of those philosophies is called practical solutions, or essentially least cost planning. So that approach uses data-driven and performance-based decisions to identify and solve problems and needs as quickly and inexpensively as possible. Now, that doesn't mean using cheap materials or taking shortcuts. That's just a recognition that sometimes you can find better solutions for less money in a shorter time frame. So increasing the focus on transportation system performance and enabling more flexible and sustainable transportation investment decisions is all part of this kind of least cost or practical solutions approach. Essentially, it means making transportation investments at the right place at the right time for the lowest cost. So what does all this really mean? There's some examples. If you think about in your daily travels, that we may need to make some trade-offs. For example, would you be willing to travel a few minutes longer in your daily commute or going to the grocery store or to your medical appointment if it meant it would be a safer trip? Another example is that related to the funding that we mentioned is the large portion of federal funding for transportation investments comes from the federal gas tax. And that's really just pennies on the dollar. It's about 18.4 cents per gallon if you're filling up with gasoline. And that hasn't been increased for more than 28 years. So can you imagine if your wages hadn't increased over the last 28 years? And especially in light of inflation, what kind of trade-offs would you have to make? We'd really be interested in hearing from you later in tonight's program on some of those trade-offs. But now we understand that we need to make these decisions on the needs of the community. Understand those needs of the community. I'm going to turn it over to Michael and Kylie now, who will describe how we approach public engagement and equity in this plan.
Thanks, Ryan. Like he said, I'll be talking a bit about how we addressed equity in Horizon 2045. So the American Planning Association defines equity as the just and fair inclusion into a society in which all can participate, prosper, and reach their full potential, unlocking the promise of a nation by unleashing the promise of all. So this really speaks to the potential to bring an entire community up by looking at who comprises that community. As an MPO, we have an obligation to fairly distribute the benefits and the burdens of the transportation system and to avoid disproportionate burdens to groups of people. Environmental justice is a related topic and is important to avoid and minimize and mitigate the disproportionate health and environmental impacts and ensure full and fair participation, prevent any denial or reduction of benefits that may come from transportation planning programs. These principles are key to our work. They are the right to live, work, and play in a safe and clean environment. And this has its origin in the civil rights movement with Title VI. Prior to the civil rights movement, planners had a bit of a bad reputation for discriminatory policies that reinforced segregation and other issues in our society, for example, for people of color. So next slide, please, Kylie. So Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act was the first real attempt to establish equality on the grounds of race and national origin with regard to federal funding, and that includes transportation. Additional federal regulations came out of the Civil Rights era, including the Americans with Disabilities Act, 1990, the Age Discrimination Act about 15 years earlier in 1975, and numerous others, which we won't go through here today. Additionally, executive orders in the 90s sought to address minority, low income, and limited English proficiency populations. More recently, the current administration has passed additional executive orders with the aim of supporting underserved communities. Thanks, Kylie. Next slide. So SRTC sought to address and advance this work by looking at 6 key indicators for our plan, that being low income, defined as those with an income within 200% of the federal poverty rate, as well as limited English proficiency households, minorities defined as those who are non-white and or who are Hispanic, households without vehicle access, age-dependent population, which is basically those who are too young or too old to work. So those that are under 18 or older than 65, not likely to be in the workforce, as well as population with disabilities. Next slide, please, Kylie. So this slide here just has a concise regional profile comparing our county to the state and the United States in each of those 6 metrics. A few of the takeaways here are that Spokane County does have a higher rate of low-income folks than the nation or Washington State. We have fewer minorities as measured, although it's important to take into account that we are a more diverse community than this 15% number shows. There was a report from the health district a few years ago, which showed that, there are over 30 different languages spoken by households in our county. Still, the minority percentage falls a bit lower than the state and the country. We also have a higher percentage of folks with disability than Washington State and the United States as a whole. So those are a few takeaways from the regional profile. Ali, I can go to the next slide. So in Horizon 2045, we took this data and analyzed Spokane County communities compared to the county as a whole and the regional average to help identify areas of potential vulnerability. We were hoping to learn more about transportation needs and concerns of those communities as well as the community as a whole. And with that in mind, we also selected focus groups based on the indicators I described. And to talk a bit more about engagement and the focus group input that we received, I will pass the microphone back to Kylie. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. All right. So as you can see here on this screen, so we just wanted to share some of the community engagement that's taken place during the Horizon 2045 update. As you can see in the timeline, we've developed a video you saw tonight, a transportation questionnaire, the reason why some of you are here tonight. We've held a series of focus group conversations. We've been tabling at community events like the bike swap and Unity in the community. We presented to different community organizations and much more. And so we're here in that October, November timeframe with this public meeting and a 30-day comment period, which we'll talk more about. And you can see in January 2022, January, all of next year, we plan to continue the engagement and build up that MTP, the user interface, as we like to call it, sort of an interactive website, as Mike alluded to earlier. And this is really to understand the transportation needs, barriers, challenges for this engagement effort. And they've centered around building community relationships and engaging with those not traditionally at the table, and building on the stakeholder engagement from 2016 with our last plan update. Wanted to share some of the feedback from the recent transportation questionnaire that we conducted in July and August. This questionnaire was shared through many different outlets, social media, it was shared through partner organizations, sent out an email blast, and we received a total of 626 responses. So we're pretty happy with that number. The purpose of this questionnaire was to understand your lived human experience, like how you, the community, move around the region, really to just better understand transportation challenges, priorities, and needs, as I mentioned. We asked this question: are the following a problem for you to get to where you need to go when traveling, walking, and biking around the region? We gave a list of different items such as, cost of public transit, access to jobs near housing, highway safety. And through this survey, or the questionnaire, we found that the top three that rose to the top being the biggest issue, we saw, so the top three are lack of bicycle and pedestrian, or lack of bicycle facilities such as striped bike lanes and separated trails, lack of convenient public transit options, and driver behavior. So those are the top three that pose the biggest problem to folks moving around our region, which was really eye-opening to us. So we will, pardon me, look at me just sliding through these. The next question that we asked is, when you think about a complete and reliable transportation system in the future, what are your priorities? And so these are all of the respondents together, and this is how all of the priorities stacked up sort of against each other. We have frequent and reliable public transportation, maintenance and preservation, bicycle and pedestrian networks, maintaining those, preserving those, improving those as the top three transportation priorities. We also took that question and broke it down by demographic. So as Michael was mentioning, those different populations, we asked demographic information on the questionnaire. So we were able to see how these different priorities, how much more important or less important they were to certain communities. And what we found was that, I mean, there's a wide comparison. I mean, it's pretty even, if you will, for some of these different communities and how they view those priorities. And so we wanted to make sure, and that's why we conducted focus groups. And I have Amber to speak a little bit more about the focus groups and how actually some of these different communities have a unique perspective on transportation around our region. So with that, Amber, it's to you.
Thank you, Kylie. Thank you, everybody who's here, for taking time out of your evening to hear about transportation systems. My name is Amber Lenhart. My background's in public health and policy, and I am doing some contract work for the Spokane Regional Transportation Council around community engagement. And so I had the wonderful pleasure of getting to help with this community outreach. And we held group discussions and key informant interviews with the goal of trying to reach out to partners in the community who either serve communities that have been historically excluded from decision-making conversations, or who typically bear the burden of transportation barriers. And so we invited these folks to participate in either guided group discussions, as I said, or structured interviews. And in all, we held over a dozen focus groups and interviews with service providers and members of those communities, including community health workers, Latinx, Asian, and Pacific Islander, immigrant and rural communities, low income, unhoused, and housing insecure families and individuals, and people with disabilities. We were able to connect with individuals representing those communities, as well as, like I said, people who work with and provide services to those communities. I want to note that we were able to offer participation incentives, $30 for community member focus group participants, as we are tonight. You will learn more on that later. We value your time. Time is money. As far as data analysis, if there are any data method geeks out there, I'm thrilled to tell you how I analyzed the data, but I used a grounded theory approach using the discussions guide as a start list for coding. Hit me up if you want to know more. Can I get the next slide, please? So we heard that there are a few regional routes that people tend to use. These are some of the main themes that came out of the discussions, such as folks coming from outlying towns and rural communities to Spokane, especially for services or appointments. And folks are traveling along the I-90 corridor between Spokane, the Valley, Liberty Lake, Medical Lake, Coeur d'Alene. So we started by asking people about where they travel. And obviously those results weren't surprising. People go to the same places you do. They go to work, school, childcare, meetings, and appointments. Many people we heard from faced barriers to traveling by car. Immigrants and refugees, for example, might not have licenses or be familiar with US driving laws, relying on family and friends for transportation. And other folks used public buses and special mobility services or other methods to get to medical appointments, or used active transportation methods like scooters, Uber and Lyft, biking, and walking. One thing we learned about special mobility services, and maybe there's someone here tonight who can shed more light on this for us, is that really it only provides transportation for those medical appointments, but people have a lot of other important appointments, such as court appointments, or even just getting to the grocery store that they struggle to find transportation for. I'll take that next slide, please. And I can say more about any of these if there are questions. And oh, I'm so excited. Deborah, you've raised a hand. Kylie, do we want to stop for input now, or like wait till the discussion? Because maybe Deborah, I'll ask you if it's critical, or do you want to wait till the discussion and then you'll be the very first one?
It's not critical, but I can tell you anything you need to know about special mobility services.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to ask you to participate in the discussion, then I'm going to hold you to that. No, thank you. Uber and Lyft aren't active transportation. No, unless you're like running. Thank you. I don't know why I did that. That's my typo. Okay, so I'm happy to go more deeper into any of these, but what we heard was some of the key challenges are that the system is really designed for solo drivers. If you think about how you get around, it's much faster to drive solo than to take the bus, especially if you're trying to get, from Medical Lake to the Valley, for example. We heard that the time investment to travel posed a particular barrier for people who have disabilities or who, for other reasons, struggle with mobility. The public transportation system can be stressful, but especially if you don't speak English or have an intellectual or developmental disability. We also heard that our newer residents, immigrants and refugees, face particular challenges to learning to drive, or even for driving to be culturally appropriate, for example, for women from certain cultures. We certainly heard about infrastructure accessibility. Folks talked about potholes and sidewalks that are bumpy. And if you can't see or have some difficulties with vision, that can be a big challenge. Definitely bike lanes, as Kylie mentioned from the survey, that came up, as well as ramps for wheelchairs and strollers and people with vision impairments. The cost of transportation was actually a major barrier for a lot of folks. The bus, there are options for low public transportation, but not quite enough. And people really were looking for more flexible options for low cost transportation. And some of those options out there just aren't quite meeting needs. And I'm happy to talk more about that. As far as cultural relevance, some people did mention fear of using public transportation, as far as ICE presence there, or even just buses, our bus system being so cold compared to the colorful musical public transportation of maybe like a Latin American country, for example. Okay, to close, I'll close with a takeaway here. And this is something that I think Lori sort of referenced at the beginning, is people face barriers to transportation access and mobility when services are concentrated away from communities, when folks have to get from where they are to those services, and they don't have an easy way to get amplified for people who aren't financially stable, for those who don't speak or read English, those who have intellectual or developmental disabilities, who reside in rural communities, or those bus just simply doesn't go, or who represent communities that have otherwise historically been excluded, like Blackness and people of color. So that was the big takeaway here, I think, is that people wanted systems, a transportation system that really met them where they're at and helped them get from where they live to those services, very low barrier. That is my summary of our focus groups, and you will continue to hear from me, I think. Kylie, can I pass it back to you to just talk about what we're doing next?
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you, Amber, for that recap and summary. It was really humbling to hear everybody's stories in those focus groups. We had a couple questions in the chat. I thought we could pause for just general question and answer. And while people are thinking of maybe their questions, generally, we had one that I thought I would go back to. Mike, do you have it handy? It is.
Yeah, I just saw, thanks, Kylie. I just saw, and I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Josette in the chat asked about the current administration's federal infrastructure package. And we get this question a lot, actually, and having worked through several of these meetings now, this question has come up, and it's obviously in the news, and people are aware of it and are probably hearing about it. So I thought we could take just a minute, and I don't want to bog us down into the weeds, but I thought maybe Lois or Ryan or even Eve, those that have been around for these infrastructure funding cycles, and that's really what I wanted to emphasize here, is that this money from the federal government comes in cycles, and so this proposal, that's this federal proposal, is part of that cycle, and so while we didn't explicitly include it in our forecast for revenue, we did make certain assumptions about that cycle continuing. So Kylie's right. We didn't use the exact numbers from the proposal that's on the table at NDC, but we did make certain assumptions again about that cycle continuing. So Lois or Ryan or Eve, I don't know if you guys want to expand on that, but again, given that we get that question quite a bit, I wanted to make sure that folks understood that these sorts of things are cyclical, and this money comes in a cyclical nature. Lois, did you want to jump in?
Sure, thank you. And I can talk about that a little bit. So generally, when transportation is funded at the federal level, it's done through an authorization. And the last authorization was called the FAST Act, Fixing America's Surface Transportation. And that was done a little over 6 years ago. And it was a 5-year bill. And it funded all of these different systems across a 5-year period. So transit and highways. And when that bill came close to expiring, a 1-year extension was passed. And that actually was set to expire in September, and it's been extended. But what you hear about in the news, the $1 trillion infrastructure package, that includes in part another 5-year spending bill for transportation, but it also has some enhanced funding opportunities as a part of the current administration's desire to go back and fix some of our infrastructure that's not keeping up. And so if something like that is passed, that will be very good for transportation here in the Spokane region and the state of Washington, as well as around the nation, because it will certainly help fix some of the infrastructure that is aging and that we're struggling with. And we definitely have a number of those facilities in this area. There's a broader bill that has funding for other sorts of activities in our economy, not necessarily specific to transportation. Does that summarize? Eve might have some other thoughts on that.
Does that help address your question? Sorry, Eve, I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
Yeah, thanks for the explanation.
But
We have a couple more, Mike. Tom just asked what part of SRTC played a role in the Bridging the Valley project?
yeah, so I'll start to answer that, and then Ryan, feel free to fill in any gaps that I missed. So what Tom is referencing, this plan, well, actually, if Mayor Wick's on, he could probably give us the full deal on that. So what Tom's referencing here, Bridging the Valley, is a modal plan that looked at the corridor between Athol, Idaho, and gosh, Ryan, help me. It's I think it was Athol to Spokane. So it looked at that entire length of the rail corridor between Athol and Spokane. And the intent of the plan was to try to the extent possible, mitigate safety concerns around rail crossings, around road rail crossings. So for those of you that have been around the community for a while, you might remember Havana, the project at Havana that built a bridge over the railroad tracks that run through the valley there in Havana. That was one project in Bridging the Valley. The city of the Valley is pursuing a project, is actually constructing a project right now. You guys probably have driven through it at Barker. That was another project from Bridging the Valley. And so those projects, Havana is complete, so it's not included in our plan, but Barker certainly was and will be until it's complete. The Valley is working on funding for Pines, the grade separation project at Pines. So that project is in our plan. And I'm sure that other folks are pursuing other projects from that plan. So Bridging the Valley is still relevant. Folks are still pursuing projects from that plan. And as folks do that, they will be included in our regional transportation plan, our Horizon 2045. Ryan, do you want to add anything to that, given your involvement with that plan when it was developed?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mike. Aspect of Bridging the Valley was the consolidation of the two Class 1 railroad lines through that corridor that Mike described. And to be clear, there was no agreement reached between the two railroads, Burlington Northern, Santa Fe, and Union Pacific, to do that. The reason that that was part of the overall Bridging the Valley strategy is if you were able to combine those two into one corridor, it would be much less expensive to bridge over or tunnel under rather than two separate grade separation projects where those two class 1 lines are not in the same corridor. And so that part has not been accomplished, but the grade separation projects of Bridging the Valley are still and will remain a regional priority. And that's why, as Mike mentioned, several are in our long range plan.
Just to add on to that, some of those projects you'll see in our transportation improvement program as well, if they receive funding from us or federal funds. So we have, and actually, Mike or Ryan, what was the role SRTC played in the study itself? Were we the lead or just a stakeholder?
Yes, SRTC was the lead, and at that time, SRTC was also managing the Kootenai Metropolitan Planning Organization. So KMPO in Kootenai County also has the portions of Bridging the Valley in Kootenai County in their long-range plan.
Great, thank you. We have another question from Larry. He asks, with the growth that EVs are expected to see between now and 2045, have your forecasts included a recognition that gas tax revenues will see a dramatic decline by 2045? Mike, would you like to?
Sure. So I think Ryan was the one that introduced this concept of uncertainty at the beginning of our presentation. And I think that's especially relevant as we look at gas tax revenue and their relationship to electric vehicles. It is undeniable that electric vehicles are becoming more ubiquitous. The major car manufacturers have started shifting their thinking to electric. You're seeing federal incentive programs to shift to electric. It's certain that electric vehicles will continue to saturate the automotive market. The question is, what extent will that impact gas tax revenues, and really when? It's incredibly difficult to gauge that. So we have looked at how gas tax revenue has changed in the past, but the past isn't always a good indicator of the future, and especially when you're looking at technology like this that can have a very dramatic and very quick impact on society. It's difficult to gauge with certainty how that will look. So one thing I want to point out here is our plan is updated every 4 years, and by updating our plan every 4 years, we're able to reevaluate how things like EVs are impacting our network, and we're able to adjust our forecasts accordingly. So one of the things we've found that we've been able to do is adjust those forecasts as we're understanding more about those impacts to gas tax revenues. So we have done our best to make assumptions about how those revenues are going to change over time, but with all forecasts, we're certain we're going to be wrong. The question is, when we go back to those, are we learning more about those impacts and adjusting that forecast based on the best available data? And we'll certainly be doing that on those cycles that I mentioned. Go ahead, Lois.
Thanks, Mike. I just want to add to that. So while the short answer might be no, because we really don't have the detail on how that's going to be impacted, there have been a number of studies about market penetration of electric vehicles. And and they go through a variety of scenarios on how fast that might occur and what that would do to gas taxes. And so it's recognized, and through the Washington State Transportation Commission, there's been some pilot programs, and folks are looking at what would replace a gas tax as that starts to be more dramatically impacted. And I think over the next 5 years, you're going to see some some more ambitious suggestions on how to make changes to that, whether that's vehicle miles traveled or some there was a pilot program in this state with Oregon to explore that. So there's definitely going to have to be some changes, but we know that change is very, very difficult, especially at a national level. So it's going to take some time, but that's a very pertinent question.
I just want to piggyback on that answer that Lois gave. I just dropped in a link in the chat to the Washington State Transportation Commission's road usage charge. They're calling it a pilot project and assessment that Lois just referenced. So if anybody wants to learn more about what they learned in their study and EV's impacts on revenues, you can check out that website. There's a full report on their pilot program and the findings that they made through that effort. So if you're interested, take a look at that link and learn more.
Thanks, Mike. Another question I wanted to ask from Josette. She asked, did anyone mention problems with road rage, aggressive driving, and accidents? And the answer to that question is yes. In the transportation questionnaire, we asked, what are big problems that are causing issues with you moving around the region? And what ranked third was driver behavior. And that would indicate, the aggressive driving, road rage, that kind of thing. So I hope that answers your question. And David here, one more question. Is there a consideration for increased wear and tear on roads from increased average weight of EVs? I understand commercial freight has a larger impact, but do you find that impacts future costs? And actually, David, from the research that I have been working on, we're actually finding that EVs are a little lighter. And so they would ideally pose less wear and tear on the roads, but I guess it probably depends on the make and model of that car. And then I don't know, of course, commercial freight is, impacts our roads, that's for sure. Did you want to elaborate, David, on your question there, or give you a moment to? Wear and tear is definitely part of the equation, I think, Mike, if you have any other thoughts on that.
No, the only thing I was going to point to is what Ryan presented, and that's that gap in preservation and maintenance. What David's getting at is really a funding category that we call preservation and maintenance, and that's the what it takes, of course, to maintain a road in a state of good repair. Obviously, changing technologies, freight, freeze-thaw cycles, all of these things impact that equation. And so, as Ryan said, we have a gap. There's a gap between what we need in terms of maintenance and preservation and what we can afford, and we fully recognize that. And frankly, we're going to just have to come up with ways to address that.
Yeah, I was just.
Go ahead, David.
Oh, yeah, I was just under the impression that lithium-ion batteries, that they were like less weight efficient for like the range, that they were on average a bit heavier. But maybe I was just misled. I'm not as familiar. Maybe it's just for the electric Hummers or whatnot. But yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, David, if I find any more information, I'll send it your way. And Deborah, I see your hand up. I think we have time for one more, and then we'll jump into the community conversation.
Well, you wanted to know more about special mobility. SMS is a medical transport company. They're actually, they contract out to different medical transport companies all around the area. There's even one that comes from Moses Lake. One of my transporters comes from Moses Lake. They require at least, they say 2 days notice, but it's actually 3 days notice. You have to have 48 hours in between 2 business days notice, and it's only for medical appointments that can be billed to insurance. So if it's something that is free, that cannot be billed to insurance, they will not take you to. You cannot go, they'll take you to counseling, they'll take you to, things like that, but you cannot go for grocery shopping. You can't go to, for things like that. But they will take you, they will schedule up to 30 days in advance, which is nice, but it can be a little frustrating, their requirements.
Thanks, Deborah, for that insight on SMS. It's a service, but sounds like there are some gaps there too. So we appreciate your sharing.
Well, they will also give you, they can also give you a monthly bus pass, but the requirements for that is if you have a reduced fare pass, you have to have 7 appointments in the month to get, if you have a regular fare bus pass, you have to have 15 appointments. Otherwise, you get 2-hour passes for each appointment. You get 2 2-hour passes for each appointment.
Yeah, that sounds like it could be a challenge for sure.
It is.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. I'm going to turn it over to Amber. I'm going to.
Kylie,
Oh, yes.
just real quick before we get to the community conference, I saw one more question come in. I know we said it was going to be our last one, but Larry's asking a good question about a state plan and how it interacts with our regional plan. And so I know we have Jason on the line, not to put you on the spot, Jason, but Larry's question is, how much impact has the new Washington Active Transportation Plan had on your plans for 2045? Jason, I'm wondering if, given your involvement in that plan development, if you could, first of all, explain to folks what Larry's referring to, and then maybe just a couple minutes on how we interact with that plan.
Mike, I don't know if Jason.
Oh, yeah, I heard
Okay.
the question, Mike. So the Washington Active Transportation Plan is being updated, in the process of being updated. In fact, there's the second phase of it. The draft is available now for review. So what we do is we look at what the work the state has done, and then we try to tie that into the work that we're doing at the regional level. So there's that coordination that's happening. And also it kind of it goes both ways as well, because we're providing feedback on that plan where they are asking for feedback where there may be gaps or parts of their analysis that they want more clarification on, or things that they could be missing. So SRTC is involved in looking at that on the technical side. And then it's also available for the public as a whole to review as well.
Great, thanks, Jason.
All right, anything else here before we move on? We're right on schedule. Thank you for that question and answer portion, and I will turn it over to Amber to guide us through a community conversation. And Amber, I will leave it up to you. I can share this screen or I can take it down. It's up to you.
Let's, you know what? Let's take it down so we can see each other. I think that'd be great. But no pressure to turn your camera on. It's 7 p.m. and we understand. Thank you, Deborah, for sharing your experience and insight that is very aligned with what we heard from the focus groups and interviews. And that's exactly the kind of information, these barriers that are particular to certain groups, or, priorities for thinking about what's our system going to look like in the future, especially that we're really looking to hear from the community. So I just invite you all to take a second to reflect on, where do you go? How do you get there in a typical week, in a typical day? And we want to hear from you, and feel free to use the chat. You can raise your hand, or you can just come off mute if you're feeling bold. What thoughts do you have about our region's transportation priorities or challenges? We've heard about some things here. In case there's a need to spur the conversation, there were comments in the chat about the cost of bus passes. Road rage, just funding, wear and tear. What thoughts do y'all have?
The cost of bus passes is a very, very big issue. My income is only $197 a month. Even at reduced fare, because I am disabled, reduced fare is $30 a month. $30 out of 197 after I pay my $59 rent and my $35 phone, I can't afford an extra $30 for a bus pass. It's just not feasible. You know, I'm stuck.
Yeah, we definitely heard that loud and clear. Thanks, Deborah. Tom, thanks for raising your hand. What's up?
No, thank you, Amber and SRTC, for inviting us to come and participate. I worked with SRTC in the past when I was with the Spokane Police Department, and I'm encouraged to see the work that's being done and the interaction with the public. I also really appreciate, Amber, the focus group questions that you put out there. I think they were framed in such a way that I do think you got very valuable and usable information. It's helpful for me to see, because coming from a public safety perspective in the past, and now being retired and trying to get from one point to the other, and having a plug-in hybrid and all the other challenges that go on, it seems to me like our biggest issues continue to be something that you I think it was Kylie originally sort of mentioned. That's the single vehicle user, which we're still seeing too many of. And I just, somewhere in here, I know the light rail was discussed in the June. I watched your June interaction as well, Michael. Thank you for that presentation. Hour and 15 minutes. I think it was very well put together. But, you know, I think we're still, in our discussions of these things, we're hearing from people like Deborah who have, you know, very, very specific needs that must be addressed. They just plain have to be. And I appreciate also whoever it was Michael, I think, was doing the equity, and that it's disproportionately available to people who are economically, racially, and otherwise challenged. I'm going to put Deborah in that same thing too, disabilities of any kind. So I just appreciate your conversation. I don't have a lot of answers. My job was to investigate. I did reconstruction of auto pedestrian collisions for about 15 years and connected with a regional transportation center and used your data sometimes as expert testimony in court for these things. But please keep doing what you're doing. And this is actually a really good turnout. I don't know whether COVID can be blamed or thanked for turnout for some of our meetings and some of the input in the meetings. So thank you.
Very interesting point there at the end about COVID. It's certainly made virtual meetings. I mean, they've been accessible, haven't they? But thank you. You made a lot of good points though. Yeah, thank you very much. Glad you're here. Tom, you have your hand still raised. If you want to put it down, you're welcome to do so. Melanie, I saw you click your video on. I'm just curious if maybe that meant you had something to say, or if you're just, no, you just felt like turning on. Okay, I'm sorry to put you on the spot. I see the chat is going bonkers.
If we could get communication going out to Deer Park, I know we need some transportation stuff out there. I've and notified STA that it would be great, since so many other smaller towns have a bus system out there. It would be great just to put that out there. If you guys want to help influence the STA to get a bus once or twice a day, there's a lot of people that it would serve.
Like a bus at those peak hours of day that does those commuter routes to Deer Park. Got you. Oh, not Deep Park. Yes, lots of comments about, we heard a lot about public transportation in the focus groups and the interviews. Tom just mentioned the despair brought upon us by the solo car. what do you all think about the future of transportation? What challenges, what do you see in the future? Are we more bus riders? Are we more solo car drivers? It looks like there's some insights in the chat about income, financial instability in the future. What does your crystal ball say? Cat. Sorry, Melanie, your cat. Okay, how about this? Let's talk about, I see questions about cars, car dependent and light rail. SRTC, Kylie, Mike, do you want to talk about that? Is light rail in the plan? What's the future hold as far as a light rail in Spokane? And then maybe we can hear from folks about what the interest is there.
Yeah, so I think it's been alluded to a couple times now that this question of light rail. And Ryan, I don't know if you want to talk about your experience with that question over the years. We have some staff from the transit provider on the call. I don't want to put them on the spot or make them feel like they have to respond. But Ryan, why don't you start and just sort of explain that question and how that thought came up and where it stands now.
Well, yeah, the light rail topic comes up from time to time, which was studied in the past and through advisory votes was essentially stopped. But the great work that Spokane Transit is doing around high performance transit, I think provides more flexibility, studying corridors and understanding how those corridors can be served before pigeonholing into some sort of a mode specific option. So as Carl, a planning director, has said many times, taking a mode agnostic approach and through a thorough planning process with significant input from the community, that's when the type of service and the type of vehicle is determined. And I think the City Line and Division Connects are two excellent examples of how service with very modern bus rapid transit vehicles can be provided for much less cost.
The other thing I want to mention is this, I don't want to get too technical here, but our plan requires that we be fiscally constrained. That means what we represent in the plan in terms of long-range regional projects we can fund them. So if we say in our plan, we have this list of projects that are what you might think of as sort of big projects, things like the North Spokane corridor in there. These larger project, light rail would be in there if it was being pursued. We have to represent those projects that we have in the plan as fiscally constrained, meaning we have the ability to pay for them over the planning horizon. As you saw in Ryan's presentation, there's already a gap between what we can pay for and what we need. And so oftentimes when folks bring up light rail, the idea of cost is introduced into the conversation. And I think once you start talking about the cost of light rail in terms of just the infrastructure it would take to implement it, that idea would not be able to be represented in our current plan in a fiscally constrained way. So even if it were included in the plan, and there's been a ton of conversation about that, it would not appear as being able to be funded. It would have to be in what we call an illustrative list. The great work at STA, the planners there are working on solutions to bridge that gap between the Coeur d'Alene area and the Spokane area. As Ryan mentioned, the mode, the way that happens, whether that be light rail or what they call high performance transit, it can be sorted out later. The idea is that the planners at STA are thinking about that and are trying to solve that issue that I think is at the heart of that question around light rail. So I just wanted to add that piece as well.
Thanks for that. I see we have a hand up from Sig.
Yeah, I was just gonna see if there was like any kind of discussion around like maybe getting I guess I'd call them like metered lights, lights that can be intelligent enough that can sense traffic and adjust accordingly at different times of the day. I know Northwest Boulevard and the Ash Maple intersections, are heavily congested and there's a lot going on. I mean, is there any discussions into things of that nature to kind of make traffic more efficient and safe?
That's a great question. I'm wondering, Eve, if you'd help us answer that question. That's a question that involves a concept known as intelligent transportation systems. That's a sort of an acronym that planners will throw around. You might hear ITS. So I wonder if Eve can kind of help us answer that question.
Yeah, I don't think I can answer specifically for the city if that particular intersection you're talking about is in their plan, but we do have a partnership with another regional agency. They're called the Spokane Regional Traffic Management Center. And we do look at investments for that communication infrastructure to put in those kind of signals that the public is needing for crossing and actuation. That's called signal actuation, when a car pulls up and it triggers a signal, or a pedestrian can push the button and change the light cycle. So those are all projects that all the cities in the metropolitan area, Spokane County, are involved in this partnership and trying to bring more of those projects on board. So good comment, and we can certainly share that with the city of Spokane.
Thanks for the question. And Eve, great to see you. Jules has a hand up.
Yes, hi, thanks for taking the question. I was just wondering, does the STA have kind of a like quick bus routes that go like quickly cross town? I actually lived in Baltimore for a long time, and I was a transit only rider in that city, as well as a bike commuter. And I totally identify with people saying that, traffic was just, the cars were just, horrific there, and paint is not, not safety. So they had a lot of options that they were putting in as well, as far as like blocking lanes. And I see, some of that going in here in Spokane, which is fantastic. Really separating the lanes and having some separate trails, which is so much safer. And, I really enjoy bike commuting here as well. And I would like to be able to take the bus more, but the routes, it doesn't really connect, and it's so difficult to get, what people have expressed, where you just can't get across town timely. If you're not going to downtown, then there's no way to make it to your appointment or your job or whatever. So I was just wondering, I'd love to see something like where we could get cars off the road, maybe with traffic calming and, maybe speed bumps in lanes that are not for buses. And that would kind of really strongly encourage the cars to stay off the road, but you'd have a bus only lanes, or HOV lanes almost, and the cars could the buses could be making their faster trips, and just have dedicated quick buses. They call them quick buses in Baltimore, where they've made very few stops. And then you'd have sort of the milk run bus that would make the stop every few blocks. So they'd have two different buses running along the same route, but one making maybe a third of the stops of the other one. So just the thought that it would be, you would take your quick bus if you wanted to get where you're going faster. So I'm sorry, that was probably totally overcomplicated.
That was wonderful. Thank you. And we heard from a lot of folks who had those same kind of comments. And I as a former resident of DC, where it was slower to drive than to take public transit. I get where you're coming from. Spokane Regional Transportation Council is not STA, but we are so lucky to have Carl Otterstrom on the line, and I'm going to put him on the spot and see if he wants to comment on that comment.
Thanks, Amber. Thanks, everyone. And apologize for I don't know if you can hear the background frog and toad music going on, but STA does have several crosstown routes or ways you can connect between communities without going to the plaza, and that's an emphasis we continue to invest in. Our Wellesley bus is every 15 minutes connecting the north side of Spokane. We're introducing 2 new east-west routes next year in North Spokane. And we also have a north-southwest bus connecting from community colleges south to the South Hill. And then now the West Plains communities, Airway Heights, Medical Lake, and Cheney used to be all connected via downtown Spokane. You had to actually go out from Cheney, go all the way in 15 miles to Spokane and go back out 10 miles to Airway Heights. And so that has all changed. Now, one of the common complaints input we get is the frequency of service. And as Ryan said earlier, we're really focusing also on high performance transit routes. And a key component of that is the frequency of the service. And so when people talk about it's really easy to use and it's quick and easy, so much of that is driven by how often the bus comes, because our experience as a bus rider, so much of it is consumed in when is that bus coming, where do I wait for it, and how often does it come, especially nights and weekends. And so we've made different improvements in different corridors. The city line is the one that will be most transformative in that it will run every 7 to 8 minutes at peak period, and it will run past midnight most nights of the week, and longer on Sundays than we currently have service. And so all those things make a difference, and they also connect to other routes. I think overall, the feedback is valuable for how we think about these connections. And importantly, the more people who are interested in transit and see it as a community value, that helps instigate further change for investing in that frequency of service and bus stop improvement. So we thank you for that input.
Hey, Carla, can I ask you one more question before I let you go? We've heard from folks about some specific routes or neighborhoods that don't get access, such as Deer Park or parts of the Northeast. I got in trouble when I called it Dogtown, Lindsay, but you're legit, you're OG. What's the best way for people to get in touch with Spokane Transit to weigh in on these sorts of needs?
Sure. So STA questions at SpokaneTransit.com is an email address that goes to our communications department. And as they respond, actually all the responses are seen by all of management, and they direct service planning comments to my department. And we track those and log those and report those to our board on a quarterly basis. I think another thing is STA questions is good for is just asking, can I do this, or how do I make this work? Because sometimes it isn't as clear as it should be, and giving that feedback. For instance, there is a bus twice a day to Deer Park, and that's provided by the State Department of Transportation. It's called the Gold Line. And so a lot of people don't know that. And so reaching out and sharing that information and making it more available and accessible for folks, I think is part of that. As we get feedback, we can definitely expand our information production.
I'm sorry, can I jump in with one more question for the regional? Is there any type of bus or transportation that connects the South when you go down toward Rosalia, down toward Pullman? Is there anything that goes down to those communities like the Tico, Oakdale? Are they, I understand it's Whitman County. Is Whitman County connected in any way to the Spokane region? Or is that any type of plan in this long-term planning as kind of, it seems like the Spokane region, as housing prices increase, it seems like people are buying out down to the South and any other area they can go to find affordable housing. Is that in the long-term plan in terms of connecting up these smaller communities?
Yeah, so that is not currently in STA's plan. I think that's something certainly we continue to talk about. There is
or just even regional.
Yeah, there's a private provider, Wheatland Express, that connects the airport to Pullman. So that I think it usually runs daily. And from there, of course, if you're at the airport, you can connect it to STA system. As far as a lot of the smaller communities, there isn't, one of the challenges is that it's a high cost for low ridership. And some of those gaps, we partner with a organization called COAST, who we STA has federal funds designated for enhancing mobility with people with disabilities and in senior populations, and those funds in part go to support COAST and their program to bring people from the Palouse, whether they're Whitman County or South Spokane County, up to medical appointments in Spokane within our service area, the urbanized area of Spokane. So some of those gaps are met, but there are certainly other gaps, and certainly something as this plan is also, we partner, SRTC really leads the charge on a human services transportation plan that's coordinated with all the different providers, because STA itself is not county-wide. It is really focused on the urbanized areas in the West Plains.
Sure. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
I'll just add on to that. Carl made reference to the work that SRTC does to coordinate all of the transit providers in the region. I think in your example, Jules, it was the example of TICO, which is outside of our SRTC's planning area, but we do coordinate beyond our planning area. So I'll drop a link from our website to that planning document that helps explain that coordination a little bit more, if that's helpful. I'll find that and drop it in.
Thank you.
Thanks for the great discussion there. Julie has posted some resources in the chat. We have time for a couple more questions. I did see something in the chat about just the growing needs of the community. Oh, Lindsay, I'm sorry. I see you have your hand up. I'll stop talking.
You can finish if you would like whatever your thought was.
Okay, well, maybe this will plant an idea seed in your head. The growing needs of the community from COVID, just people's rent and the struggles people are facing to just meet ends and keep their families stable, and what may be the concerns around future growth and the future transportation needs of the community.
Well, I hope that density would be the answer to that. But I was going to ask if this was the right place to ask for, like, how do we get Foothills to go down to 3 lanes with a turn lane in the middle? Would that be something that we'd bring up here, or is that a city issue, or it seems transportation related?
That's a great question. Who do they go to? Who do we go to get Foothills to weigh in on specific locations where there are concerns and potential solutions in the community? SRTC.
Foothills, and assuming that you're talking about the portion of Foothills that's in the city of Spokane, we can connect you with those folks, those transportation planners at the city. That I'm not exactly sure which portion you're talking about, but
I'm thinking
likely,
like just in front of Yokes.
By Yokes.
Yep, gotcha. Okay. Yeah, so that is likely a local facility. And when we say local facility, we mean it's under the sort of planning jurisdiction of the city of Spokane. So we can connect you with transportation planners there at the city of Spokane that can take that feedback and use that feedback in their own planning efforts. So we'll make sure to get you that information.
Thank you.
Well, it is the time. We have a couple minutes left. I have a couple slides to share with you. One, most importantly, thank you for all of your feedback. There were questions that we did not get to. We fully recognize that we did not get to all the comments and questions. There were a ton of great ones. I think what we plan to do is incorporate the questions that went unanswered in the appendix of what we have a public comment sheet. So we'll track those yeah, just wanted to turn your attention to the SurveyMonkey link. This is really important. If you are interested in receiving your incentive for tonight, the QR code, if you open up your camera, hover over the QR code, a link should appear at the top of your phone. You click the link, that should take you to the SurveyMonkey where you can fill out your information and press complete. And then Amber will receive those and she'll be in touch with you about getting that. So one other quick item that I wanted to share. This is where, if you're looking for our draft document, the Horizon 2045, it is on our website. You can go to srtc.org. If you hover over to the plans and programs tab and tab down one, it takes you to our Horizon 2045 page. Or if you type in, as seen on the screen there, horizon2045.org/horizon-2045, you can see this page here, and this is where the draft chapters are linked, sort of in the middle there. And then additionally, I want to remind everyone we are in a public comment period phase. So the comments tonight are part of this public comment period. We gather those, it's open for 30 days. We gather all of those and we respond to you. We did provide a link at the end of each chapter. If you have a comment or question, feel free to reach out to us, without using this link. But if it's related to the MTP, the Horizon 2045 plan, there's a SurveyMonkey link. It will ask for your contact information if you would like to reply to you with the answer. If not, it will be shared in the appendix, as I mentioned. Just most important, these comments help shape the plan and future plan updates, and we really value your input tonight as well. And just generally how you can connect with us: website, email. You can email any of us planners directly, or the contact.srtc@srtc.org. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, in all the places. So thank you. I see one last hand up from EJ. I think Lindsay, maybe yours is an artifact hand. Thank you everyone for participating. Go ahead, EJ.
So you answered my question in part by making a mention of the public comment period, because I wondered if there was an additional opportunity to kind of weigh in and just offer, general thoughts. But I also wondered if there will be additional opportunities in the future to kind of come together as part of a public process and inform, just kind of how this is developing.
Definitely, yes. So we do have a required 30-day public comment period. Those are recorded and included with the planning document itself. But we intend on continuing to engage with the community, through neighborhood organizations, community-based organizations. You can reach out to us if there's, somewhere that you'd like us to present this information to. So, or if you have questions, feel free to let us know, or comments or thoughts.
Excellent. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you. All right, everyone. Thank you for hanging with us all the way till the end. We really appreciate it. And I'll go back. I'm going to keep this slide up for a minute. I want to make sure everybody can access this link. So I will see you later. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. We really appreciate your participation.
Thank you.